Hi everyone, welcome to Beginner's Ukulele with me, Matt Stead. I thought before we get into playing ukulele, it might be quite interesting to explore the different sizes of ukuleles, the advantages and disadvantages of each size, the tonal properties, and what they can be used for. So here we have the four main sizes of ukulele: soprano, concert, tenor, and the big daddy of them all, the baritone. The soprano is the smallest size ukulele and probably the truest to the original form of the ukulele, which derived from a tiny Portuguese instrument called the machete de Braga. The concert is slightly larger, the tenor slightly larger again, and the biggest of all is the baritone. Now, when we talk about sizes of ukuleles in terms of the names soprano, concert, tenor, we're really talking about the length from the saddle here to the nut here, otherwise called the scale length. So all different types of manufacturers will have different size bodies, so the actual size of the main body of the ukulele, and even different widths this way round as well. So the soprano scale tends to be around 14 inches. The concert scale tends to be around 15 to 16 inches, and the tenor scale tends to be around 17 inches. The baritone can be anywhere from 19 inches to around 21. And it's important to say, actually, even within those scales, there is some variation between manufacturers. So take sopranos, for instance, even though they're roughly 14 inches from here to here, some manufacturers will be a few millimetres larger, some a few millimetres smaller. In terms of tuning, the soprano, concert and the tenor ukuleles all have the same G, C, E, A tuning. In fact, if I play them, notice that the tone is different, and we're going to explore that in more detail in a minute when we actually play them, but the tuning is the same. Now, the baritone ukulele, the relationship between the strings are the same, but the tuning is lower in pitch. We have D, G, B, E, which is similar to the bottom four strings of a guitar, or the top four in terms of pitch. So we're going to actually play some of these next so you can see the advantages and disadvantages of each and kind of get an idea of the tone and whatnot. Now, don't think of them as one size is better than the other. They all have their uses and they all have advantages and disadvantages over each other. Try and avoid misnomers that you find on the internet as well, and the cliches that you get. A lot of people will say people should start on a soprano and they're good for women and children, and then you kind of upgrade to a tenor or a concert, and that's rubbish. Some of the best players in the world, such as Herb Otter, one of my favourite players from Hawaii, always played a soprano instrument. You can quite often think of them as tools for different uses. Sopranos are particularly useful for certain types of songs, which you'll see in a minute. Here's the smallest of the bunch, the soprano ukulele. One of the things that people love about soprano ukuleles is that the string tension, the tightness of the strings underneath your fingers, is relatively low. To get the same tuning on a concert and a tenor ukulele with the larger scales, the string tension increases so they can feel a little bit less forgiving under your fingers. But soprano being the shortest scale, they're really comfortable to press down for chords and notes underneath your fingers. One of the things that people might call a disadvantage on the soprano is that having the shorter scale means that the distances between the frets this way horizontally is narrower. So you have a bit less room to put your fingers for certain chords, especially those squishy 4-finger chords. There's not a lot of room to put your fingers there. Now, one of the so-called disadvantages of a soprano ukulele is the lack of sustain. That means when you play a note or a chord, sound tends to dissipate and decay quite quickly. So notes don't ring out for particularly long. Now, that can be a disadvantage when you play in certain forms of music, but for some forms of music, it can actually be an advantage. And for that kind of high, fast attack type music, that old type music that a lot of people love playing on the ukulele, it can sound really fab. That kind of kind of fast kind of style of playing, it really suits it. And if you're into that kind of old Roy Smeck type finger style, it's gone slightly out of tune, but you get the idea. It can sound really, really nice for those forms of music. And don't forget that the width of the strings this way, the width of the nut here, can have quite an impact on space as well. So even though you might not have a lot of space this way, certain brands will have a wider nut here, which gives you a bit more room for the fingers. So with the soprano ukulele, they can be really good for children to learn on because the string tension is lower, but don't let you think that it's just a starter ukulele. Some of the best ukulele players in the world play these and can make them sound really, really beautiful. And also think about the type of music that you play. If you love that kind of George Formby or Roy Smeck, that kind of old time music as well, the soprano can really, really suit that kind of playing. Then we move on to the concert scale. Now the concert scale I often refer to as the Goldilocks scale, not too big and not too small. Because the scale is slightly longer, we have slightly higher tension, but not as high tension as a tenor. We have slightly more sustain. So when you play chords and notes, they ring out for that bit longer. So there's a bit more body, and quite often you'll get a little bit more depth out of the concert ukulele as opposed to the soprano ukulele. Now, for me, concert ukuleles are beautiful strumming machines. If I was going to have one size for strumming, that kind of... concert ukuleles are perfect for it. It just sounds beautiful on a concert ukulele. And of course, as compared to the soprano ukulele, because the scale is longer, the frets are wider apart. So if I show you the same chord I showed you on the soprano ukulele, notice I've got that bit more room to put my fingers as well. Now, it's really hard to generalise in terms of what ukulele is right for a particular player. It depends on so many factors, right down to the hand size of the ukulele player, what style of music they want to play, whether they've got arthritis in the fingers, all sorts of things to think about. But if I was to generalise and say I was recommending a ukulele to someone that had never played before, I would say the concert is a nice middle size to go for if you're not sure, because it doesn't have the string tension of the tenor. It's a bit more forgiving on the fingers than the tenor ukulele, but it has a bit more sustain than the soprano and a little bit more room for your fingers. But of course, your mileage may vary. That's a beautiful thing about musical instruments. Next, we have the tenor, the largest of the GCEA tuned ukuleles. Now, the string tension is a bit higher on a tenor ukulele than a soprano and concert, so it's a little bit less forgiving on your fingers if you're a beginner. But if you get a decent setup and the shop that you buy it from keeps the string action nice and low, we'll talk about that in another video, and with the correct strings, these can actually still be really comfortable to play. Because of that longer scale length and the bigger body of the tenor ukes, you tend to find that they have more sustain. So when you play notes and chords, they ring out for a longer time, and they have a little bit more depth of tone in general as well. So they're really nice for kind of fingerstyle music. Stuff, which is really nice. Still work well for strumming as well. And of course, we have that bit more room again than we have over a concert and a soprano in terms of putting your fingers for notes and chords. Now again, these are all generalizations, but if you're coming from the ukulele from another fretted stringed instrument, such as guitar, which is a larger instrument, you might find you're more comfortable with the tenor scale because you have a bit more room to put your fingers. And you might find if you're playing a lot of fingerstyle ukulele that the tenor ukulele really suits that style. Of course, that is a generalization. There are some brilliant classical ukulele players that use soprano and concert scale instruments, but in general I find that extra sustain and depth of tone really suits that form of music. Next up we have the baritone ukulele, the big daddy of the ukulele family. Now you have to be a bit careful with the baritone because it is tuned in a different way to soprano, concerts and tenors. Where sopranos, concert and tenors are all tuned G, C, E, A in standard tuning, the baritone ukulele is tuned lower in pitch, D, G, B, E. And more often than not, the top string nearest your nose, this one here, tends to be lower than all the others. We call that linear tuning. So you can still play all the same shapes as you would on a soprano, a concert or a tenor, but the chords are going to have different names. Now, this makes playing a baritone ukulele slightly awkward for beginners because if you go to ukulele lessons or to a ukulele club, all the other players that are playing soprano, concert and tenors are going to be doing different shapes for their chords, so it can get a bit difficult for you to learn on. But they're absolutely beautiful ukuleles to play because they have a very deep, satisfying tone. I have a baritone at home, and at the end of the day when I've been playing ukulele for a long time, I love the kind of the deep tone and relaxing tone that you get out of a baritone. So very satisfying, isn't it? Really lovely for jazz chords. And some of the best jazz ukulele players in the world, one of my favourites, a guy called Benny Chong, plays baritone ukulele. But beware for beginners, different chord shapes. So just to finish off, I'm going to play the same thing on all four sizes of ukuleles so you can hear the differences in the tones. Do remember that tone will be affected by what the ukulele is made from and the manufacturer, but just to give you a general idea of the sustain and everything, here's the same thing on all four ukuleles. In conclusion, a very rough generalization, soprano ukulele, shorter scale, lower string tension, very forgiving, but slight lack of sustain. Concert size, slightly higher string tension, slightly more sustain, but not as much as a tenor. Really lovely for strumming. Tenor ukulele, longest sustain, but slightly higher string tension, more room for your fingers in terms of playing chords. Baritone ukulele, lovely for blues and jazz and smooth deep playing, very relaxing tone, but different tuning from sopranos, concerts and tenors. So trying to avoid too many generalizations, really have a think about what's most important to you in terms of ukulele size. Is it the tone and sustain? Is it being easy to play in terms of string tension? Would it benefit you if you have large hands to have a larger scale instrument or smaller hands to have a smaller scale instrument? And also just in terms of your physique, what would feel most comfortable to hold? All of those things are really important factors to consider.